Have you ever wondered what really happened to Pontius Pilate, the man who, in a single act, changed the course of history by condemning Jesus to crucifixion? Who was he beyond the Roman governor? Did he feel the weight of that decision? And what led a man of such power to a dark and mysterious fate? In this video, we will dive deep into the life of Pilate. We will explore how he, a respected Roman leader, found himself in the midst of an impossible decision, a moment that would not only change history, but also mark his own soul forever. The political pressure, the fear of uprisings, and the invisible forces acting behind the scenes, all of this conspired to make Pilate a hostage to his own choice. But what happened after he washed his hands? Did he manage to live in peace with that decision, or were the consequences harsher than he could have imagined? In this video, we will reveal the dark fate of Pilate, marked by regret, suffering, and mysteries that still raise questions today. Prepare to discover a forgotten story that sheds new light on the enigmatic figure of Pontius Pilate. The answers may surprise you and perhaps change the way you view one of the most impactful moments in all of history. Imagine an ancient land where every hill and every city carried a millennia-old weight of stories and secrets. This was Judea, a province with a unique life, pulsating with the faith of its people. It was a land that followed its own rhythm, where the Jews lived according to their traditions, revering laws and customs that seemed as old as the surrounding mountains. For the Jews, the world was much more than the dominion of Rome. It was governed by sacred beliefs and a connection to something greater. Have you ever tried to understand the wars that made Rome the greatest empire in the world, but ended up getting lost in so many confusing details? If so, you're not alone. Imagine finally mastering the most important details that shaped Rome, learning the strategies of great generals like Julius Caesar and Scipio Africanus, and understanding how these maneuvers changed the course of history. Knowing the difficulty of finding this information, I have made available my digital book, The 10 Battles That Shaped the Roman Empire, where you will have access to all of this in a clear and direct way. Understand how Rome won impossible battles, learn curiosities that you won't find anywhere else, and become an expert in Roman military history. Access the pinned comment and get yours now, as our units are running out. Now I will tell you the story of a man who went to a land full of tradition. Rome sent a strong and ambitious man named Pontius Pilate. He was a governor, an official who represented the strength and authority of Rome, and belonged to a privileged position known as the Equestrian Order, a respected group within the Roman nobility. Pilate came prepared to impose the laws and order of Rome, but he soon discovered that this task would not be easy. The Jews were not like other peoples that Rome had conquered. They resisted. They took pride in their beliefs and did not accept interference in their faith. From the very first day, Pilate knew that governing Judea would be like walking through a land full of mines. Any misstep could lead to disaster, but he was a determined man, and for him, fulfilling his mission was what mattered. To maintain order, Pilate believed it was necessary to demonstrate the strength of Rome, making sure that everyone, without exception, understood who was in command. In one of his first orders, Pilate demanded that Roman symbols, representing the emperor, be brought to Jerusalem. For him, this was a natural gesture. Showing the power of Rome in an important city like Jerusalem was a tradition of the empire. But for the Jews, these Roman symbols were an affront. They saw the emperor of Rome as a foreign ruler, someone who had nothing to do with their faith. Thus, seeing those symbols, so distant from their own values, was as if Rome were trying to erase the identity of their people. What Pilate did not expect was the intense reaction. A crowd of outraged Jews marched toward him, protesting and demanding that the symbols be removed. They were not asking timidly. They were shouting, marching, and facing the Roman guard fearlessly, as if their very lives depended on it. Pilate watched everything with a mix of surprise and irritation. He was not used to seeing such resistance, especially not from a dominated people. But the Jews did not back down. They continued for days, returning to the governor's palace every day without showing any signs of fatigue. Pilate tried to intimidate them, ordered the soldiers to surround the crowd, threatened them, but nothing shook them. Even with the Roman sword around them, they stood firm, willing to risk everything for what they considered sacred. After days of tension, and with the people showing no intention of giving up, Pilate saw that he had no alternative. He realized he could not bend the will of that people by force. Finally, he relented. He ordered the symbols to be removed from Jerusalem, and the Jews, seeing this victory, dispersed, but with the certainty that they had defended what was sacred to them. For Pilate, that episode was revealing. He had learned in a bitter way that governing Judea would not be an ordinary task. He was faced with a people who preferred to risk their lives rather than allow any insult against their faith. And this resistance, now evident to Pilate, was just the beginning of a tumultuous relationship, a dance of power and faith that would become increasingly intense over time. So, what do you think about Pilate's story so far? Tell me in the comments your opinion and if we forgot to mention anything. After the turmoil caused by the Roman standards, Pilate thought he could consolidate his power in another way. Judea was facing water supply problems, and the idea of building an aqueduct to solve this issue seemed like the perfect solution to him. Pilate dreamed of leaving his mark on the region, and a majestic aqueduct that would bring fresh water to Jerusalem would be a great achievement. He imagined himself being remembered as the governor who brought comfort and innovation to that arid land. But to make this project happen, Pilate needed resources, and he knew where to find them: in the temple treasury. This treasury was not just a collection of coins, it was a collection of sacred donations made by the Jewish people over the years, a fund intended to maintain the dignity and operation of the temple. For the Jews, tampering with that money was unthinkable, almost heresy, as it represented the heart of their faith. When Pilate decided to use part of that treasury to finance the construction of the aqueduct, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Upon hearing of the decision, the Jews were furious. They gathered in large numbers, their faces marked by indignation. For them, Pilate's act was a serious violation, a disrespect to their religion and values. The temple treasury was sacred, and its use for a Roman project sounded like a desecration. The news of what was happening spread like wildfire, and soon the city was filled with voices crying out for justice. "Give back what is ours," the people shouted, marching toward Pilate's palace. The religious leaders joined the crowd, saying that the money should be used only for sacred causes, not for an aqueduct that would benefit everyone but was a symbol of Roman domination. Pilate, for his part, did not understand the depth of the people's anger. To him, the aqueduct was a necessary work and a sign of the progress he was bringing to Judea. He thought that by bringing water to the city, he would be doing something good that would please the people. But the reality was that for the Jews, this decision was a disrespect to their faith. This was just one of the many confrontations that would mark Pilate's relationship with the Jews. The story of his governance in Judea is punctuated by moments like this, where each decision seemed to further inflame the spirit of resistance among the local population. Tell me in the comments if you knew this story about Pilate, and if you have any curiosities about him that you would like to share. Before Pontius Pilate was appointed governor of Judea, he had already followed a path marked by the rigor and discipline of military life. Imagine a dedicated young Roman soldier, learning early on that loyalty to Rome came above all, that following orders was not just a duty, but a matter of honor. Pilate was that man. Years of service had shaped him to act with determination, courage, and even a certain harshness. He was well acquainted with the battlefield and knew the weight of armor and the sound of clashing swords. But above all, he understood the value of an order and that it should be fulfilled without question. As he rose through the military hierarchy, Pilate stood out as a firm leader, someone who maintained composure even in the most intense situations. He knew how to inspire both respect and fear, qualities that caught the attention of superiors in Rome. Pilate did not come from an ordinary family. He belonged to the equestrian order, a select group that held a privileged status, something that few achieved. Being part of the equestrian order meant that he was considered a kind of noble warrior, a man born to lead with responsibilities that few could bear. With this position, Pilate was seen with great expectation. The Roman Empire expected the men of the equestrian order to be examples of discipline, honor, and loyalty, and he took pride in that. His name carried weight, and his reputation as a strict and competent commander was something he defended with conviction. So when the opportunity to be governor of Judea arose, Pilate accepted it, knowing that it was not an ordinary position. He was about to take on a mission where the weight of Rome would rest on his shoulders. Upon becoming governor, Pilate brought with him military experience, but soon realized that Judea was not like the regions he had fought in before. This province seemed shrouded in a silent challenge. It was not about conquering new lands, but about controlling a people whose resistance was not in arms, but in convictions. The Jews were different from the enemies Pilate had faced on the battlefield. They did not surrender easily, and their beliefs were so strong that they seemed to form an invisible armor, a force that even the sharpest gladius could not penetrate. Still, Pilate believed that with discipline and power, he could bring this region under control. In his mind, he drew strategies like a general before a battle, imagining how he could impose Rome's respect in such a complex land. And behind every decision he made, he knew that the gaze of Tiberius, the emperor, was upon him. Tiberius trusted Pilate, and Pilate was determined not to disappoint. If you are enjoying this content and believe that these stories of Rome are helping you better understand the empire that shaped the world, don't forget to leave your like. This not only helps spread the true history of Rome to more people, but also ensures that YouTube shows you more videos like this. So, give a like and strengthen this journey of historical discoveries. When Pontius Pilate arrived in Judea as governor, he brought with him the symbol of Rome's highest authority. He had a rare and absolute power, the right to condemn someone to death if he deemed it necessary. It was a huge responsibility and a sign that Rome trusted him to maintain order in a distant land where the people had customs and beliefs very different from those of Rome. This power, however, was surrounded by rules. Even as governor, Pilate had to follow the Roman system, which, although rigid, was extremely organized and hierarchical. If he wanted to execute someone based on a sentence from the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, he still needed Rome's approval. The Sanhedrin, in turn, was composed of the wisest and most respected men in Judea. They were the religious leaders, the scholars of the sacred scriptures, the priests, and the elders. For the Jews, the Sanhedrin represented justice and wisdom. They were responsible for judging matters of faith and resolving conflicts according to the laws that came from their ancestors, passed down through generations. They had the authority to deal with most crimes and religious issues, but they did not have the power of life and death. This power belonged only to the Roman governor, a constant reminder that Judea was under foreign rule. Imagine then the tension that this generated between the Jews and Pilate. They saw their lives and their laws at risk in the hands of a man who did not know their beliefs, who did not understand what was sacred to them. For Pilate, those laws and rituals were just part of the local culture and often made little sense. He was a practical man, trained to maintain control and peace in his own way, the Roman way, which was the only law he truly respected. So whenever the Sanhedrin sentenced someone to death, there was a final obstacle. That sentence had to be brought to Pilate for approval. It was an uncomfortable situation for the council, as they had to submit to the governor, someone who did not share their values. This process was not just a matter of formality, it was a reminder of Roman control, a reminder that even the most important decisions, those involving life and death, were not entirely in the hands of the Jews. To Pilate, it was as if the Sanhedrin were just another group of local leaders. He did not feel the same reverence that the Jewish people had for that council. When members of the Sanhedrin came to him to request permission for an execution, he saw them almost as subordinates needing his approval to make decisions. This relationship between the governor and the Sanhedrin was always shrouded in tension. Pilate's authority represented the strength of the empire, while the Sanhedrin represented the identity and faith of the Jews. Thus, each important trial became a power struggle. The Sanhedrin had the respect of the people, but it was Pilate who held the final hammer, who truly decided the fate of each case involving a death sentence. This division of power created a complex and delicate scenario where the tension between Roman law and Jewish traditions seemed to grow with every decision. And always remember that if you have doubts about the true stories of Rome from reliable sources, just grab your digital book in the pinned comment, 10 Battles That Shaped the Roman Empire. It's very important that you get it right now before the units run out. When Pontius Pilate took control of Judea, he knew he needed to demonstrate the power and presence of Rome. For a man like him, showing strength was essential to maintaining order. Therefore, he ordered his soldiers to march to Jerusalem with large banners of the emperor, imposing flags adorned with the image of Caesar himself. Each banner was a clear representation of Rome, a reminder that the empire was vast, powerful, and that its reach did not respect borders. But Pilate did not understand the depth of what he was doing. To him, these images were merely symbols of power, something he had seen in various provinces, a normal tradition for any city under Roman rule. However, Jerusalem was not just any city. For the Jewish people, Jerusalem was a sacred place, where every corner and every stone told ancient stories laden with meaning. And one of the fundamental beliefs of this people was the prohibition of any image that could represent a man or a god. Seeing those images of the emperor being raised in the streets of their city was, for them, an offense to their faith, an insult that could not be ignored. As soon as the banners arrived, a wave of indignation swept through the city. The news spread quickly, and within hours, men, women, young people, and the elderly gathered to protest. They formed a true crowd marching through the streets, their faces marked by fury and determination. For the Jewish people, this act was an unacceptable provocation, an attempt to violate the sanctity of their city and impose a foreign culture on their beliefs. As the crowd approached, Pilate realized that the situation was more serious than he had imagined. He expected resistance, but nothing like this. The streets were packed, and the clamor of voices grew louder. The Jews demanded that he order the removal of the standards. They were not asking politely. They were shouting, marching, and facing the Roman guards fearlessly, as if their very lives depended on it. Pilate watched everything with a mix of surprise and irritation. He was not accustomed to seeing such resistance, especially not from a subjugated people. But the Jews did not back down. They continued for days, returning to the governor's palace every day without showing any signs of fatigue. Pilate tried to intimidate them, ordered the soldiers to surround the crowd, threatened them, but nothing shook them. Even with the Roman sword around them, they stood firm, willing to risk everything for what they considered sacred. After days of tension, and with the people showing no intention of giving up, Pilate saw that he had no alternative. He realized that he could not bend the will of that people by force. Finally, he yielded. He ordered the standards to be removed from Jerusalem, and the Jews, seeing this victory, dispersed, but with the certainty that they had defended what was sacred to them. For Pilate, that episode was revealing. He learned in a bitter way that governing Judea would not be an ordinary task. He was faced with a people who preferred to risk their lives rather than allow any insult to their faith. And this resistance, now evident to Pilate, was only the beginning of a tumultuous relationship, a dance of power and faith that would become increasingly intense over time. So what do you think about Pilate's story so far? Let me know in the comments your opinion, and if we forgot to mention something. After the turmoil caused by the Roman standards, Pilate thought he could consolidate his power in another way. Judea was facing water supply issues, and the idea of building an aqueduct to resolve this matter seemed like the perfect solution for him. Pilate dreamed of leaving his mark on the region, and a majestic aqueduct that brought fresh water to Jerusalem would be a great achievement. He envisioned being remembered as the governor who brought comfort and innovation to that arid land. However, to make this project happen, Pilate needed resources, and he knew where to find them: in the temple treasury. This treasury was not just a collection of coins, it was a collection of sacred donations made by the Jewish people over the years, a fund meant to uphold the dignity and operation of the temple. For the Jews, tampering with this money was unthinkable, almost heretical, as it represented the heart of their faith. When Pilate decided to use part of this treasury to finance the construction of the aqueduct, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Upon hearing of the decision, the Jews were furious. They gathered in large numbers, their faces marked by indignation. To them, Pilate's act was a grave violation, a disrespect for their religion and values. The temple treasury was sacred, and its use for a Roman project sounded like a profanation. The news of what was happening spread like wildfire, and the city soon filled with voices crying out for justice. "Return what is ours," other people shouted, marching towards Pilate's palace. The religious leaders joined the crowd, saying that that money should only be used for sacred causes, not for an aqueduct that would benefit everyone, but was a symbol of Roman dominance. Pilate, for his part, did not comprehend the depth of the people's anger. To him, the aqueduct was a necessary work and a sign of the progress he was bringing to Judea. He thought that by bringing water to the city, he would be doing something good that would please the people. But the reality was that, for the Jews, this decision was a disrespect to their faith. With the crowd in front of the palace, Pilate felt the pressure rising. To calm the spirits, he decided he needed to act quickly. He called his soldiers, who were always ready to intervene in conflict situations, and positioned them to protect the palace. The soldiers, with their shining armor and swords in hand, mixed with the crowd, ready to maintain order. But the situation quickly intensified. The people were so determined to protest that they did not let themselves be intimidated. With shouts and fervent gestures, the crowd became increasingly agitated. When Pilate saw that the situation was spiraling out of control, he ordered the soldiers to advance, resulting in a violent crackdown. The swords and shields clashed, and what began as a peaceful protest turned into a brutal confrontation. For the Jews, that day was marked in memory as a moment of betrayal. They saw Pilate's intervention not just as a matter of power, but as a true profanation of their values and faith. The use of the temple treasury to build an aqueduct became a symbol of Roman disrespect, and the relationship between Pilate and the Jewish people deteriorated even further, planting the seeds of a revolt that was to come. And remember, whenever you want to have total access to how Rome, this powerful civilization, was formed, just grab your digital book, 10 Battles That Shaped the Roman Empire. Just go to the pinned comment and get yours. Make sure to do it today as our units are running out. In the last years of his governorship in Judea, Pilate faced a complicated scenario. He had become a feared and hated figure, especially after confrontations with the Jewish people. Every action of his seemed to further inflame tensions. The Jews considered him an insensitive foreigner, someone who did not understand their faith and traditions, while Pilate saw himself as a commander who needed to impose order. But what Pilate may not have realized was that his actions were eroding his position of power and gradually planting seeds of revolt wherever he went. It was then that a tragic and unexpected event marked the end of his journey in Judea. The Samaritans, a group inhabiting the region neighboring the Jews, had their own beliefs and traditions. One of these traditions involved a sacred legend. It was said that the tabernacle of Moses, one of the most important artifacts for the people, was hidden on the slopes of Mount Gerizim. Driven by faith and the hope of finding this invaluable object, a group of Samaritans began a pilgrimage to the mountain. For them, it was not a political mission or an act of defiance. It was a spiritual quest. They believed they would find a part of their sacred history there, something that connected generations and kept their identity alive. The news of this pilgrimage began to spread, and soon Mount Gerizim was filled with Samaritans, all in search of the same goal, gathered in a climate of devotion. But Pilate, who viewed any gathering as a possible threat to Roman order, interpreted this as the beginning of a rebellion. To him, that gathering was dangerous. He feared that the group might be organizing to challenge the government, and he was not willing to take that risk. So without further investigating the true intentions of the Samaritans, Pilate ordered his troops to go to the site and disperse the crowd. However, he did not issue just any order. He authorized the use of extreme force, and the crackdown resulted in a massacre. The Roman soldiers attacked the unprepared and defenseless group of Samaritans. What was supposed to be a peaceful pilgrimage turned into a scene of horror. Men, women, and youth present were caught off guard, and many lost their lives that day. Those sacred hills, which should have been a place of hope and peace, became the stage for brutal violence. The people, both Jews and Samaritans, were shocked, and the news of the slaughter spread like a storm wind, igniting outrage throughout the region. This episode was the last straw. Complaints against Pilate had been piling up for years, but now with the massacre of the Samaritans, Rome's patience had reached its limit. The governor of Syria, the authority responsible for supervising Pilate, received orders from Emperor Tiberius to remove him from office and send him back to Rome. Pilate, who had once been a symbol of Roman authority in Judea, was now leaving the province in disgrace, discredited and hated. When Pilate returned to Rome, he was no longer the respected man he once was. His reputation was ruined. Tiberius, the emperor who had appointed him governor, was old and no longer cared to protect him. Furthermore, shortly thereafter, Tiberius died. and his successor, Caligula, was known for his instability and cruelty. Pilate, having lost imperial protection, was left to his own devices. There are reports that, tormented by the mistakes he made, Pilate could not bear the disgrace. He had been a governor, a soldier, a man of power, but now he was abandoned, his name tarnished. Some say he was called to account and faced a trial that sealed his fate. Others report that, consumed by guilt and shame, he took his own life during Caligula's reign, unable to bear the brutal downfall he had suffered. Pilate's trajectory was marked by rigid decisions and attitudes that did not consider the spirit of the people he governed. His attempt to impose Roman authority over Judea generated more revolt than peace, and each of his actions only distanced the people further from the Roman government. In the end, he paid a high price for the choices he made. His fall was as tragic as his rise had been imposing, leaving history an example of how power can become a burden when carried without understanding and respect for the culture and faith of those under its dominion. And so, the name of Pontius Pilate, which was once synonymous with power and command, became a symbol of arrogance and ruin, of how inflexible and insensitive decisions can transform a leader into a shadow of themselves. The story of Pilate will forever be marked not by the strength with which he ruled, but by the consequences of his lack of understanding, which led him to the tragic and lonely end he never imagined for himself. So, we come to the end of this twist-filled story about the life and tragic end of Pontius Pilate. He was the man who ruled Judea with an iron fist, but ultimately faced the consequences of his own choices. But stay tuned, because this story doesn't end here. There is still a dark secret about Pilate, something that may change the way we see his role in history, and that will be revealed soon. Whenever you want to know more about stories of Rome, like the one you just heard, just grab your digital book that I made available in the pinned comment, 10 Battles That Shaped the Roman Empire. The units are limited, so get yours today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next content. Here, we always bring stories like this, full of details and mysteries that help you understand the past in a way that keeps you engaged from beginning to end. So get ready for the next video and come discover even more about the dark secrets of Pilate and much more. See you soon.